sifuna mabulu anokusidela, baila bafana bayokuwashaya. Hem,
Asisal al-makam, asisal al-makam. Si Elisa Benista zinkele, si Elisa Benista zinkele. Oi nakaleo madoda, oi nakaleo madoda. Oyaya, 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 oyaya.
Vukani, oh vukani mawetu, nikede, oh bafela abantu, ukuna makonto, uya memeza, safela isizwe, sinkitana mabulu.
Asisal makam, asisal makam. Sila estás in kede, sila estás in kede. Oi nakaleo madoda, oi nakaleo madoda. Oyaya, 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 oyaya.
Welele, oh welele kabane, Mandela, oh kausi pendule, sifuna mabulu anokusidela, baila bafana bayokubashaya. Hem.
said good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I wish to thank you for your wonderful patience. Thank you for bearing with us as we waited for our esteemed guest speaker. We shall start the evening with the Bluebells Choir singing the national anthems. As you can appreciate, they are young and need to return to their homes and have quite a distance to travel. So without delay, we'll ask Bluebells to come to the stage and perform the national anthem of both India and South Africa. Bluebells. Joining in the singing. Ambassador, come stand and sing. They are in front.
उनको माइक्स देना है माइक्स दे दीजिए दूसरे माइक्स का
Sikaleli Afrika, malupakan isu pondolwayo, izwa imitandazo yetu, nikosi, tina, lusapovayo, murena buluka se chaba sa Jesu. O felice dentro alle masceglie, o si buluche, se South Africa, South Africa, Aiti blauwa non se himat, Aiti diptewa non si. Servi che vertes, quadi cante antuti, sounds the call to come together, and united we shall stand. Let us live and strive for freedom in South Africa, our land. जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड़ उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जल वितरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तब जय गाता जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय
Thank you so much. I think they deserve a round of applause. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Cedrick Crowley. I'm the Deputy High Commissioner of the Republic of South Africa to India. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all tonight to the 6th Nelson Mandela Lecture. Before we commence our proceedings, we'll ask the High Commissioner, Ndebele, to bestow upon our speaker for the evening, Professor Di Agavastram. So, Ambassador, you will bestow this beautiful Agavastram on Professor Nandy.
Morning, you know.
So, distinguished guests, ambassadors, diplomats, esteemed representatives from academia, our important children, I wish to welcome you to tonight's event, where we celebrate 105 years of President Mandela's life and 30 years since his demise. So this is an important day, and we have had quite a number of engagements in the morning. We celebrated what the UN termed in 2009 International Nelson Mandela International Day. And in the preambular paragraph of resolution A/A/res/64/13, it reads thus: recognizing the long history of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela's leading role in and support for Africa's struggle for liberation and Africa's unity, and his outstanding contribution to the creation of a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. Recognizing also Nelson Mandela's values, his dedication to service to humanity as a humanitarian in the field of conflict resolution, race relations, promotion and protection of human rights, reconciliation, gender equality, and the rights of children and other vulnerable groups, as well as the upliftment of poor and underdeveloped communities. Acknowledging Nelson Mandela's contribution to the struggle for democracy internationally and the promotion of a culture of peace throughout the world. And in response to this resolution, the permanent representative of India to the United Nations in New York and your current Minister of Housing, Ambassador Puri, at that stage wrote thus. He said, with these words, this is the Indian permanent representative, with these words, the UN General Assembly adopted resolution recognized the incessant struggle of a living legend, whose core values of peace and tolerance were also embodied in the United Nations Charter. I think that is quite a nice tribute from the Indian permanent representative and now Minister of Housing in the national government of India on the day of the adoption of this resolution. So today we have come to honor this great leader, and for the last 6 years, the International Center, Indian International Center, in collaboration with the South African High Commission and the Working Group on Alternative Strategies, has held this Nelson Mandela Lecture. Last year, I was privileged to attend the 5th one, and this year, we are privileged to again be hosted by the ICC as we celebrate and commemorate this lecture. So, tonight, we have none other than the distinguished Professor Nandy with us. We have Professor Borker, and without further ado, we'll ask Professor Borker for his remarks, and we invite him to the podium. Professor Borker.
Madiba Tujhe Salam, Program Director, Deputy High Commissioner Cedrick Crowley, His Excellency High Commissioner of South Africa, Sibusiso, Ndebele, my respected friend, Dr. Ashis Nandy, whom we affectionately address as Ashishda, and from whom I have taken over as the unenviable position of trustee of India International Center 3 months ago, my young friends from Bluebells International, who beautifully presented the national anthems of India and South Africa, my fellow members of IIC and the Working Group on Alternative Strategies. Like every year, on July 18th, this morning, 2 school children drawn from schools of the National Capital Region of Delhi gathered at India International Center to celebrate the birthday of Madiba, like they have done for many years now. But due to the floods and the closure of schools, the numbers were less today. But the lack of numbers was made up by the music presented by the school choir groups. Le 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 Le, which you heard now. Get Up, Stand Up, Don't Give Up the Fight was another song presented. And Make Me a Channel of Your Peace. Where there is hatred, let me bring your love. In fact, that was the theme we had today for the Mandela Kathamala. To quote Madiba, no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. These words from Mandela, from his autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, which was published in 1994, I do not have to remind this audience how important and critical it is in our times in this country. Setting the mood was the procession from the Gandhi King Memorial Plaza to the Deshmukh Auditorium, with Indian and South African colors and joyous hails of Madiba Tujhe Salam. Every year, the South African High Commissioner addresses the students, as High Commissioner Ndebele had done today. High Commissioner Ndebele, having been a comrade in arms with Madiba and having spent 10 years in that brutal prison on Robben Island, and that gives a very special meaning to what he says. 4 questions were put to him today at the interaction session with the students. The first question was the connection between running and the commemoration of the Mandela Day. This question the High Commissioner directed to the Deputy High Commissioner, who explained the importance of a healthy body to a healthy mind. The second question was on the High Commissioner's jail experience. The High Commissioner very touchingly narrated about not even having seen the stars, because he would, there would be a bell at 3 in the afternoon, and they would be asked to retire for the day. And so he would not be able to even see the stars. The third question was how the High Commissioner's involvement in the political struggle all began. The High Commissioner narrated that how difficult it was to explain to his young daughter, who's very much with us today, what the horrid apartheid meant. The fourth question was, how do you explain that there is a Mandela in you? This the High Commissioner directed to me. I'm very fond of telling the students, there is a Mandela in you, there is a Gandhi in you, there is a Martin Luther King in you. Don't ignore that voice which is inside you. So I explained to answer that question, the values close to Mandela, the values close to Gandhi, the values close to King. And that was one word, the fight for justice. The values of forgiveness, compassion, and inclusivity, which Mandela embraced, is even more relevant today when our world, especially in India, is beset with conflicts, with terror, and with hateful ideologies. Madiba's fearlessness and courage in the face of discrimination and adversity inspires us and continues to inspire us. all. Madiba, tujhe salam. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Allow me also to recognize Ambassador Pundit Kundal, our Joint Secretary, and Mr. Singh, and we thank them for their presence. Ladies and gentlemen, much has been written about Nelson Mandela, a revered, resolute, respected, revolutionary, and reconciler. But he is such a complex person that lived in such simplicity. And every year during these lectures, we peel the layers off and we try to dissect who this person was, what lessons we can draw from his life and his inspiration. Tonight provides us with an opportunity to yet again listen to the insights of one of the most renowned, to box him and say he's a political scientist, he's a psychologist, it's too difficult because we are all nuanced. And Professor, we had the fortune of meeting one of your students and admirers, myself and Lara, earlier today, and he was in awe of you and the groundbreaking words you did, Professor Nandy, in this discipline before it was even recognized, educational, the political psychology. And so it is with interest that we look forward to listening to your intervention, your statement entitled Regimes of Hatred, Regimes of Conviviality. And I had to go and look up that word. Commissioner, I didn't understand that word. But I'm not going to spoil it for you. I'm going to allow our professor and guest speaker, whose CV is too long. I will send it to each of you via email. It's in a book form so that you can know who our speaker for the night is. Professor Nandy, the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much.
I apologize for holding up this meeting. Old age has its own problems. I hope your wait has been and will turn out to be interesting. Some years ago, I often have to give memorial lectures. I was to give an Ambedkar memorial lecture. I thought I will do an experiment by not once mentioning Ambedkar in the lecture. Because saying how good he was, what was his education, where from he came, this is all known. Everybody knows that. People come there as a form of courtesy. I thought I would rather extend his thoughts and give his thought the dignity that he fully deserves. But unfortunately, I received a lot of abusive letters, even from my friends. So I have decided this time not to open by speaking about Nelson Mandela. I will start with other things and locate Nelson Mandela in the global culture of knowledge and public service, if I may put it that way. A few simple clarifications about the title of this lecture. By regimes of hate, by the way, it is becoming a very fashionable subject now. There have been a lot of conferences and so on and so forth now in recent times. I remember the first conference on hate was convened by Elie Wiesel at Stockholm. The Nobel Committee sponsored it. I was there. And incidentally, I also met, here I come, unfortunately I am flouting my own principle, Nelson Mandela also was there. Anyway, and that state has started a series of such conferences because hate is the organizing principle and often the principle of rule in number of societies in the world. In the last 150 years, at least something close to 100, maybe I would safely say that 80 to 90 countries have turned authoritarian. The game started with Italy and Germany. Everybody knows that. One doesn't have to remind you. And it included a whole series of countries in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. And in fact, dismantling a democratic polity became almost like a game. In some countries, I have heard the army has taken over the country's rule so many times that they have virtually lost count. Thailand is a good example. Our next door neighbor, Pakistan, had five military regimes. One was kind of not that significant. It's to the credit. Now, if any praise of Pakistan is something which is taboo in this country nowadays, but 4 of the military regimes were dismantled by street demonstrations. Quite an achievement. Anyway, now, what I mean by regimes of hate is regimes where there is a miasma of hate. The regime utilizes hate to mobilize people, and because hate begets hate, in turn gets hatred, and that further encourages other kinds of emotions to come into play, such as fantasies and ideas and plans of revenge, anger, and similar other emotions. So the idea of hate is a complex system. Mostly it is used for mobilization, but it also, at one time people used to say that wars make nations. That's a very old saying. I have been hearing it from my childhood. Now, that is also an indirect way of saying that hates make nations. So in the process, mobilizing hatred and mobilizing the people in the name of hatred has become a game in large parts of the world now. Large parts of the world. And this goes often with certain degree of anger, contempt, and somewhat paranoid world. I will come to that a little later. This is what I wanted to say about hate. This is what I mean by regimes of hate. States or regimes which live in a miasma of hate. That's that. The definition of regimes of conviviality is more difficult because basically, I have depended on 4 definitions which are often used in this kind of states. First, such states often display or often play with utopian ideas and visions as a healthy exercise, but never close it by an ideological closure of the kind of vision you are talking of. So there is no check to it. And my feeling is this, and I think many people will agree with him who have studied this kind of things, that any utopian vision, when actualized, becomes a dystopia automatically. It is it's a genetic code of utopias that once you actualize them in reality and use the state power to do so, that is a sure way of autocracy, bringing in autocracy. Yeah, that's one. There are other ways also. So people, a healthy, normal state or a system should allow people to have ideologies, personal ideologies, but should not try, I feel, by that, to try to take up this responsibility of using the ideology to define the state. I mean, there are so many examples of this, Comrade Stalin finished the first 2 Politburos without absolute ruthlessness, because his utopia was a kind of a utopia where all enemies should be eliminated. It's the world's first socialist state. Anyway, I don't want to go into that now. There is a slight touch of anarchy involved in my definition of conviviality. Because this is what anarchists thought, or people who knowingly or unknowingly were anarchists. Some, like, for example, what would be a good example? Henry David Thoreau, or nearer home, Gandhi. They were anarchists, basically, because they didn't depend on the state to get their ideas actualized. Not even ideologies. He hated the idea of Gandhiism and always discouraged people to use those terms. So that. On the whole, in these states, the state is, I would say, let me say, put it this way, that the state doesn't think it is the best ruling country in the world, and doesn't want to take the responsibility of making it the best ruling country of the world, because that will be a discovery or plan of the state imposing the vision of a better society. It allows the society to actually actualize its games, and so on and so forth. For important issues in the state, there are countries where you ask for a referendum. You ask for a referendum. To give you an example of this, a few years ago, they took a referendum. I was mentioning the referendum in this context. Scotland, whether Scotland should remain in Britain or go out of Britain. Now, this referendum and the results did not go Scotland's way. It lost it, even in Scotland. But the very idea of this kind of separation, I mean, and look at it, that the referendum was ordered and executed by the Parliament of Britain. Parliament of Britain, they were responsible. And everybody accepted it. It was kind of almost playful way of deciding this thing. Any Indian state trying to do today, or not only in India, but virtually in any part of South Asia, and probably Southeast Asia also, I'm afraid this will lead immediately to civil war. Civil war. Because that's the way one learns to handle sedition. There is no concept of sedition in the concept of the referendum on Scotland's exit from Britain and remaining back in the European Union. Okay. Nobody thought that this was a great achievement in that Scotland stayed back. And not even Scots felt this was a great deprivation. It was almost taken as a simple referendum which everybody should accept as in the sporting spirit, if I can use that term. They probably believe that the idea of sedition should be only in the books of law, amongst the lesser orders, colonial societies, where they have left this kind of legal intrusions as something to handle the locals. And we know the result, what it is like, has happened. So you can see that regimes of conviviality are more difficult to define. It is a country, it is a state which has a healthy, robust belief in the ordinary citizen and his limits as well as his potentialities. This is the old anarchic philosophy, but compromised in the context of the present times. That's what I'm basically saying. I mean, one good example was Sri Lanka before the civil war and before the this family, what do you call it? The one who ran away from Sri Lanka. I forgot. Anyway, so because suddenly Sri Lanka had actually, economists were saying that Sri Lanka has already left the third world and can be put in a certain higher level of a welfare society. It was a welfare society, welfare country. Well, but Sri Lanka's ambition became how to become like Singapore or Hong Kong. And Hong Kong and Singapore can have this dramatic developmental profile that everybody is calling them Asian tigers. Why not us? So result was also the civil war also partly came from it because that also was, they also wanted a little bit of hate in the political system to mobilize the majority community against the minority community, and that ended in a civil war. We know Sri Lanka has come back to not to its old state. It is now probably lost something like 25 years of its own good work. Now, I would like to come to this thing about to give you some idea of this which constitute the backdrop of regimes of conviviality. I trace its origin to the second half of the 19th century, when this is the important part, I might shorten it, but this second half of the 19th century, for the first time, found 4 charismatic figures in the world of science, which established not only the strength of the Enlightenment values, but gave it a certain weightage to scientific rationality and reason as the core values of Enlightenment. It was the grand old period for science. Science became the measuring stick, measurement for everything. Everything. First was Charles Darwin in the 19th century. Then came Karl Marx. This is all at that time, early 20th century. And towards the end, Karl Marx, and towards the end of the century, Sigmund Freud. And as a footnote to the 20th century, I think 20th century is, I should say 19th century. Yeah. An important footnote, Albert Einstein. His discoveries were in late 1890s, crucial ones. So these 4 people gave an enormous prestige to science. And gradually, the enlightened values began to be interpreted slightly differently. They always presumed that the core value of them was the idea of scientific rationality. That's the core value. Now, the greatest figure, greatest figures of Enlightenment, Voltaire. Voltaire did mention just a minute. Anyway. What I wanted to say was this, that Voltaire was the one who tried to give 3 core values to the Enlightenment visions. reason, skepticism, and tolerance of diversity. By the time the 20th century began, these three values have somehow shrunk to two, because somewhere tolerance of diversity, his values were reason, skepticism, and tolerance of diversity. These were three values. The diversity, tolerance of diversity has been dropped. So it stated that only reason and skepticism says. That's all. Now this, whatever it might mean, in more moral terms, is somehow or other that by that time, these four stalwarts of the 19th century, their worldviews have gradually spread all over the world. There was not only Darwin has dedicated his book to, Marx had dedicated his book to Darwin, and Darwin in turn felt obligated to Galileo, because from Galileo onwards, the role of humanity in the global universe has been diminishing according to this, because the Earth, decentering the Earth and decentering the Bible itself, where the three Abrahamic faiths had this, that instead of that, trying to make a, just a minute. Yes, that's right. Now, the idea was that Darwinism, when it's formed as social Darwinism, which has also come everywhere, became a catchword in every discipline, and the newly born social sciences also took up upon it. And every time, suddenly, all of a sudden, the idea of that, not ideas, that world of ideas, everything, civilizations, cultures, states, societies were being classified in terms of evolutionary theory. Social evolutionism became a fashion all over the world. Even a person's life cycle became evolutionary. And the social evolutionism immediately classified a large part of the world as basically primitive, not fit for the modern world, and could be used probably for labor only, probably for they needed white rule, the modern rule, and the argument often was this, that they were modernizing them. Some didn't go for that way. They, of course, said that this kind of people, primitive people, should be exterminated because they are not fit to survive. Not that they should, maybe not fit to survive. Now, this had immediate results. The first genocide of the kind, first modern genocide. There have been genocides earlier also, even in Roman times. But the modern genocide started by the virtual extinction of Hereros and the Namas in southwest Africa, which is now Namibia, where the German army general who was appointed governor, Roth, von Nortra, or von, General von Trotta, who, after virtually finishing of these two communities, could say proudly that extinguishing such inferior cultures and races, he had served not only Germany, but human civilization itself. That was the argument. 1 decade after that, the doctors in Germany claimed a different kind of right. It is there was no Nazi party in the first decade, and second decade of 20th century. The German doctors claimed that they must have the right to terminate lives that are not worthy of life. And all these genocides and these, both the genocides, you can see that the emphasis has moved from the older idea of ethics or morality or compassion, but to the new idea of scientific breeding, eugenics, biological theory, and so on and so forth. It is scientization of the justifications for genocides. I particularly put it that way. It is not all genocides were technically consciously done that way, but it's a fact. It's a fact that knowingly or unknowingly, science has become the standard to extermination. It is. I'm not arguing for the extinction of science. I'm just pointing out what is the reality. Now, only gradually, it took some more time to the consciousness to seep into the world that this is not an unmixed blessing. This idea of social evolutionarism and classification of people as worthy and unworthy, or people who should be ruled or used in agriculture, as was actually done in the American slave trade, and was in plan of Germany, Adolf Hitler, to do after conquest of Russia. That's what they wanted. And he clearly stated, the documents are there. But this has started state. To end, so that today, it is, we can see in the two world wars, that this logic has been taken to its logical end. Not because science is uniformly bad, but people, I think, will look at 20th century science. It has given a lot of lovable things. I mean, it has given us antibiotics all the way to spacecrafts. space travel. But I do believe that future generations will look at the 20th century, where the greatest achievement of science was putting into gas chambers tens of thousands of women and children, including adults, but men, but tens of the non-litigating, and sorry, no military targets, but women and children in gas chambers, and the bombing of Hiroshima. Bombing of Hiroshima had a little bit of precedence because Winston Churchill and Sir Arthur Harris together moved the emphasis from strategic bombing, which means bombing military targets, to area bombing, which meant that you don't have to give a reason. You just go and bomb German cities and wipe out men, women, and children all together. That's the idea. That's the way it was done. These two, I've given this so that you can see that how the idea of hatred there operates not only the German side, but from the beginning, because they were racists and responsible for 6 million deaths, organized death, and also thousands of, as you know, I have been to small concentration camps where the job was to just kill. They said one was to kill 80,000 Russian soldiers because they had no way of handling them or housing them or taking care of them. So one by one they shot them all in a small room. I saw the room and how the whole thing was done. And some of the people were doing this also had done psychological problems after that. Genocide is not one-sided. Though commit the genocides also have other kinds of histories too. Anyway, but Hiroshima was very interesting because Hiroshima, it now transpires, this is that the army chiefs all opposed it. They said Nagasaki is good enough because it is a military target. And that will demonstrate to the Japanese that it's not worth fighting the World War because you cannot win it. And nuclear bombs will destroy the whole of Japan. So, but it was the scientists, once again, who insisted that Hiroshima be bombed. There are two reasons are given that people suspect there are two reasons. One, that Hiroshima is a town, which is a city, which was not bombed at all in the World War II because it was nothing. There was no army target there, a military target there, and therefore Hiroshima was intact. And scientists wanted to measure the exact destructive power of that bomb. The other is this, that there are two kinds of bombs, one for Nagasaki and one for Hiroshima, and they wanted to compare them. Both of them are very important considerations, I'm sure, not for the citizens of Hiroshima who were wiped out, but it's a good lesson of what kind of dehumanization has come into the world and what kind of role hatred or ideas of this classification of communities, cultures, and civilizations as an evolutionary model, within an evolutionary framework, what it can do. This is I have now come to what I wanted to say. I think that in our times, two people only, if I, to the best of my knowledge, have tried to have a regime which is reasonably convivial, or you can say which promotes sociability. That without, it is not very ambitious, it has no large ambitions, doesn't want to define ambitions, doesn't want to take that kind of growth of development, right? Because it was obvious for some reasons that some of what this was doing. One was Nelson Mandela, and other person who also looked like that's the way he thought was Václav Havel. These are only two persons, believe it or not. I'm not mentioning others who had this kind of model. I think that Gandhi has a much more radical, right? Because he was basically his thought falls within anarchic philosophy, anarchic worldview. Anyway, but that's a different thing. And I'm just saying in terms of the rulers of the 20th century. There is a logic of these things, that once you see what others are doing, if you are taking it and not having any reservations about taking the model, then that itself is dangerous. For example, the so-called Asian tigers, which I mentioned earlier, each of them have gone through a strong, well-organized autocratic system. All. And that, the Asian tigers, all right, but the tigers were all man-eaters. So this is the way that they are there. So the temptation of that success spread, and many in Asia, Africa, and Latin America exactly went that same way. And this should be a lesson to all of us, that a quickening of development is always dangerous in all countries. It does mean that some people will have to or forced to sacrifice or made to sacrifice for the sake of certain other kinds of people, and there is this natural tendency to that process that it automatically grows in acceleration, accelerates over the years. Now, what kind? I said these very peculiar names, these two names, because amongst rulers, these two persons had certain characteristics which all the autocratic regimes always have, the rulers have. First, I will just go now stick to Mandela, that all autocratic regimes and their leaders have a strong streak of narcissism. And it is remarkable how much Nelson Mandela did not have that. His narcissism went only as far as the Madiba shirts. Madiba shirts. That's the narcissism only. Not beyond that. Nothing beyond that. No? In fact, I have read accounts of when somebody pointed out to him his enemies and his critics. He begins to, and they were very disappointed and disturbed that Nelson Mandela started defending the critics of him. Yeah? So he was a man of this kind, of the person who wanted and did not go by the ambitions of autocrats, so to speak. The second is a strong streak of suspiciousness, which can go as far as paranoia. These two, I couldn't find any record, any, not even when he was in jail. There was this, no. He always worked with the team. In fact, you mentioned Robben Island. Some people call it Robben Island University because they have a discussion group and they were planning for the future. Yeah? So, mind you, in the jail, I'm sure the High Commissioner will endorse this. That absence of suspicion, and absence of paranoia that somebody will take my chair, which is one of the clearest signs of an autocratic regime. And some of them, the autocrats, have often not been satisfied by killing one or two people they suspect. They have finished the whole clan or some of all persons associated with them. Stalin finished the first two Politburos altogether. Straight, neat, clean, absolute clean. Okay. Now, this suspiciousness, because it turns to paranoia also, has also, this can be also pointed out as one of the possibilities of self-destruction also. But anyway, what I'm saying, the third, autocrats are, because of the suspiciousness, always afraid of dissent and rebellion. And in the process, they gradually either take over the rule from, say, for example, if you have a cabinet, then you gradually, the cabinet ministers become secondary or useless. You take on all the things. You are the last word. This happened in a number of countries. And in the process, they mess up the governance and nobody can be such a genius that he can handle 30 postings. Some of those people did this kind of a centralization of power. And the result is this, that it becomes anarchic in a very destructive sense, because there is no real real attempt to take up a job and do it critically, because everything belongs to the tyrant, his word. So that. Now, it is true that Nelson Mandela had lived through 2 or 3 other phases of his life. He was, for a while, a member of the South African Communist Party. He was also, for a while, in a violent movement to unseat or oust the apartheid regime. So it was not that he was with Alia, did not know or did not test violence. But he never stayed back in that stage, or it didn't continue it in any way, further way. He knew that what he was going to do after assuming power, what they would do, would be a different kind of regime. And I think South Africa has emerged a much more healthy and stronger because of the presence of not only Nelson Mandela, but his group of people with him. Because they were always very group, large group, and also some of the persons who are sitting outside, some of the critics and some of the writers and so on and so forth. They produced a dedicated band of people to keep the ambitions of the country at a manageable level. And that's why I chose to go back to this idea of conviviality to present my talk. I think I have come to the end of the thing. I will just say that it is not that, and for example, we have other examples from Africa where that autocrats have, freedom fighters, after coming to power, has become autocratic. Mugabe is a good example. He has recently died in Singapore, in exile. And that might have also been a warning to many South African rulers. Anyway, but on the whole, I think, and finally, I want to make this comment that perhaps the finest proof of the way Nelson Mandela and his group of dedicated adjutants, if I can call it so, handled that was Truth and Reconciliation Commission will remain a major exemplar of how to handle deep communal, ethnic, or racial differences peacefully. Because the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Desmond Tutu did not only confine itself to the legal texts by which to judge the persons who have tortured, the torturers and the killers of the apartheid regime, but was also went to the sensitive to, Desmond Tutu was very sensitive to and respectful towards the traditional, local, tribal customs and ethics. And part of the idea of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came from that awareness. I have been often told by my African-American friends that that was wrong, that there should have been some punishment, and strict punishment for some of the things, because the whole thing was beamed all over the world, and many of them felt that they were themselves that this should be punished. I think they are wrong. I think I will leave the judgment to Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, but I do feel that that was perhaps a fantastic foundation on which to build a new South Africa, and they have done so. In that sense, Nelson Mandela not only was a pioneer in the kind of regime he created, but I would say that he remains probably the first critique of the main pathology of the 20th century world, which we have just crossed, which we are living out in the 21st century. Was one of the first rulers to perhaps even defy this idea of particularly knowledge systems that you deal with, and not respect them, all the traditional wisdoms of nation states and so on and so forth. Thank you very much for your patience. I'm sorry I was not in the best of spirit today, but
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you, Professor Nandy, for that fascinating lecture. I will not even attempt to summarize what it is you try to convey, but the important things we take away is the juxtaposition of authoritarian regimes versus utopian regimes. You indicated it was easier to define authoritarian regimes and how difficult it is to define utopian regimes, or as you put it, this difficult word, conviviality. You then went on to say that our pursuit for science, we should be measured in terms of the epistemological, theological definitions and basis of science. To the extent that you say science without ethics is what will lead us to destruction. And I think that at least summarizes it. Then you went on to define, I think, in your own words, the more positive form of governance, which you says is a healthy, robust belief in ordinary citizens in terms of their limits and their ability. You then went on to give at least some classification of Nelson Mandela in terms of his characteristics and what it is he possessed and what he did not possess. And I remember you talk about he always had a group. And in all his speeches, he will never talk about I. I can remember 3 times Ambassador Ndebele. The one time is when he took responsibility for his actions in court when they sentenced him. I said, I am prepared to die. But when it came to the good that he did in the country and in the world, he always talked about we, recognizing that it's not his own ability, but the support that he had from people like Ambassador Ndebele and his other comrades. The other time he did use High Commissioner is in his speech to the UN in 1998 upon his retirement. So I give you a small excerpt of that, and then I will hand over to Ambassador Ndebele to conclude for us this event. He said in 1998, and this was his final speech to the UN, he said, as I sit in Kunu, this is now his retirement home, and grow as ancient as it heals, I, and this is the 3rd time he used I as far as I can remember, will continue to entertain the hope that there has emerged a cadre of leaders in my own country and region on my continent and indeed in the world, which will not allow that others should be denied their freedom as we were, that any should be turned into refugees as we were, that any should be condemned to go hungry as we were, that any should be stripped of their human rights as we were. I will continue to entertain the hope that Africa's renaissance has struck deep root and will blossom forever without regard to the changing season. Were all these hopes to translate into a realizable dream and not a nightmare to torment the soul of the aged, then will I indeed have peace and tranquility. Then would history and the billions throughout the world proclaim that it was right, that we dreamt, and that we toiled to give life to a workable dream. That is our Madiba, and I think you, through characterizing his abilities and his character, have outlined what makes him indeed a leader that we can be proud of. High Commissioner, you have the last word.
Thank you very much to all of you for coming to be with us as we commemorate, as we remember our icon, the world icon, Nelson Mandela. Professor Ashis Nandy, Professor Suhas, Borker, members of the Diplomatic Corps, honorable guests. Today we all say, Madiba, Tuje, Salam. It is my honor to deliver the closing remarks of the 6th Nelson Mandela Lecture at the conclusion of International Nelson Mandela Day. Allow me to express my sincere appreciation to the India International Center and specifically the Working Group on Alternative Strategies for continuing the proud tradition to celebrate the legacy of Nelson Mandela. It was a memorable occasion this morning to join hundreds of children of New Delhi in celebrating the life and legacy of one of our shared icons. Ladies and gentlemen, as we commiserate with the government and the people of New Delhi who assist in trying to overcome the recent floods, I wish to sincerely thank every one of you who made the time to join us tonight. Professor Nandy gave us a lot to reflect upon on a topic close to my heart, and I do not wish to distract from this with a long speech. Allow me to rather share with you two quotes that, in my view, capture the essence of what Mr. Mandela shared with us on the topic of hatred and racism. And you will pardon me because it has been quoted, but it will do no harm to say it again and again. Madiba says, no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Secondly, he says, racism is a blight on the human conscience. The idea that any people can be inferior to another, to the point where those who consider themselves superior define and treat the rest as subhuman, denies the humanity even of those who elevate themselves to the status of gods, close quote. Ladies and gentlemen, as we leave here tonight, let us take these messages with us in honoring and remembering Tata Madiba as he was affectionately known in South Africa and throughout the world. Let us galvanize our efforts to create the fair, just, democratic, and peaceful and prosperous world which we so desire. Before closing, I wish to thank particularly the India International Center, Professor Borker, Professor Suhas Borker, yes, Professor Ashis Nandy, the working group on alternative strategies, Bluebells, of course, we can't forget Bluebells that have entertained us so well today. We thank them all. Just before I sit down, let me just to remember just where we were and where we are. Just one anecdote. In 1992, I was in the United States, and it was at the height of the conflict in South Africa at the time. And in LA, I met one gentleman, African-American, who was quite curious. Oh, brother, where do you come from? You come from? Then I say, of course, he himself then said, are you coming from Africa? Oh, yes, oh, you come from Africa? Oh, it must be Nigeria. I said, no. Oh, Kenya? No. And then, oh, where? South Africa. He said, oh, that can't be much fun. I felt quite bad about it. But indeed, when you read of South Africa of 1992, so much conflict, bloodletting and all that, indeed, when you look at it, it can't be much fun. And you say, but we are going to change that. We are agents that are going to change that. And changing South Africa might not look very ambitious to someone outside. What did you want with South Africa? We wanted South Africa to be normal. Is that all you want? Yes, to be normal. If you are not in a normal society, you can't imagine how wonderful it is just to be a normal society. And indeed, it became so. It became so that you ask ourselves here is India with a wonderful cricket team in the world. But we also have got a wonderful cricket team. But India could not play with South Africa. And the point that they raised, and all democratic countries raised the same point: no normal sport in an abnormal society. Until you yourself make yourself normal. And what is normal? Normal is to choose a cricketer who is a cricketer, that's all. Not that he has got short hair or long hair. He's a cricketer, that's what you're talking about. But if you've got another criteria other than cricket, no, we can't play with you. And that accelerated, that hastened our road to freedom. That refusal, and many other things, of course, that India did. But later on, South Africa became a very normal country where if you are in a South African mission, you know that people you meet, hey, how soon can I get a visa? A visa. Now, to get a visa for South Africa, when we some 2 years ago, it took 21 days. Then we said, no, 14 days. Now we are 5 days. And we want to reduce that 5 days to 3 days. And And to reach India, when I'm in South Africa, I want a visa to India. Bam, 12 hours you get it. So we'll get there as well. Because now South Africa is an attractive place to get to. A story is told of people who were flying, and it's an aviation story. And then, of course, they met this turbulence, very terrible turbulence on air. It became clear to the pilot that there isn't a way in which you could save everybody. Rather, sacrifice a few to save many. It's a very democratic principle. Then the pilot, of course, then said, this is what you've got to do. And of course, we start with the cargo. Whether you're at Louis Vuitton or Gucci or whatever, goes. So cargo went, but still the turbulence continued. He said, well, what do we do now? Let's reduce the fuel. Then they ejected some fuel so that they just have enough. But still the turbulence went on. Then there is no other choice now. Some people must go. Then he says, can we have volunteers? Volunteers of a few to save many. Very noble. There were no volunteers. Then said, well, the only other way to do it is to do it alphabetically. Then he said, well, Africa? Nobody moved. There was a young man who was traveling with his father, and the father always insisted that no matter what, you must tell the truth. Now, the father was not moving when they said, Africans, no. Oh, gosh. Then Americans, nothing. Brazilians, nothing. It went down and went down. As it went down, the young man asked the father, Daddy, why are we not responding? We said we must always tell the truth. And the old man said, my son, we're in aviation here, we're flying. And you know, South Africa in aviation is ZA. Z Africa. So today, we are all South Africans. So today, indeed, Mandela has made us all South Africans. And we thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, colleagues, once again for your attendance. We appreciate it, and we wish you a wonderful evening further. Thank you so much. Photograph.